Good afternoon, everyone. I'm having some computer difficulty. My computer updated overnight to the new iOS version and it's not recognizing my webcam. So I apologize that you're getting my picture for the credential instead of my face. Normally I would be here, but I'm having all kinds of computer issues this morning. So with that being said, you feel free to turn your screens off as well because here's what we are. Um, so Leanne's here. She's gonna help me out, hopefully. Like I said, I'm having some computer issues. I just had to like log out and log back in really quickly. So I'm hoping everything is up and running. Let me first check in and make sure that everybody can see my screen. It should say standard 4, service planning and monitoring. You could like give me a thumbs up or just chat in the chat box if you can see what I'm looking at. Perfect. Thanks, Miranda. Um, and then also just to kind of start things off, so standard 4 is a standard that's only applicable for long-term home visitation programs. So if you've got a program that's not long-term home visitation, feel free to stay in and listen. I think there are some valuable pieces to some things in the standard that maybe aren't something that you have to do according to the Iowa Family Support Credential Standards, but they might be beneficial just for programmatic, CQI kinds of purposes. And then also just to build a better program. Sometimes we have group programs and we have short-term programs who do work on goals and service plans with families. And so these might be some things that you would want to bring back and, um, you know, implement pieces of things that you see here today that we talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We've got our first couple of slides are just our things that we are going to talk about at the beginning of every webinar. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is policy versus procedure. And most programs that have gone through the Iowa Family Support Credential in the past and that are working on renewals or even their second renewal have pretty well got the policy piece nailed down. Policy, you know, it is it's policy primarily will be statements of what or why you're doing something. We do our program implements goals with families that do these particular things. The goals do these things, or they're very broad. They rarely change, and a best practices was we would like to see those approved by the board, whether that be governing board, an advisory board, whatever kind of the setup of your program would be. And those are just kind of those general guiding principles. The procedure, which is kind of where we're moving towards now. So we've got programs that are pretty well into their policy. They know what they do. They know, and those procedure pieces they've got down like in their heads maybe, or in, not super official places. But now it's a matter of, we're kind of guiding programs towards getting those procedures documented on paper in a procedure manual. They can be part of the policy, they can be separate from the policy. It is 100% up to programs how they want to do that. But really, it's kind of, for a couple of purposes. One, so that the peer reviewers are able to see right there on paper what the process is supposed to look like. There's less questions about like, oh, I don't quite understand how this piece works. Like, but they know that it's done because it says in policy this is what we do, but it's like those little pieces, like how does that work, who does that, how often do they do that, where is it documented. So those pieces are going to be prone to change. They're super narrow in application. They don't necessarily need to have board approval. Some programs will choose to, and those are going to really detail specific processes or protocols. These are really going to be those pieces that, like, if a supervisor or a coordinator or even a family support worker, left and that position needed to be filled again, how would the new person know what to do, when to do it, where to do it, all of those different things. And so as the Iowa Family Support Credential, or IFSTAN, begins to move programs and encourage programs to start getting things written down for procedure, you're going to see this graphic on our slides in those places where kind of some of the things we're talking about is more procedure, like how we can boost this. So we've made this cool little, it's not cool, but it's kind of nerdy, but I wanted a way to like show programs like, hey, this is above and beyond. This is extra. This is not, this is more than just what meets the standard, but it's really going to set the program up for planning for longevity. So this, and then also these are kind of those things where we're saying the peer review, putting this in the policy or part of the procedure will help the peer reviewers know what specifics to look for, especially, and kind of the way that we want programs to start kind of thinking about that is if your policy is a kind of verbatim the standard or very close to what the standard is, you know, that's kind of like your clue, like, hey, there's maybe some work that we can do here to make this be a little bit more solid, to make sure that the next person that comes along doing this work kind of has the foundation. They already know what's kind of how to do things and that kind of thing. So, and then the other thing we're going to talk about is something that we don't talk about very often, but we're going to make sure we start doing that, is the revision dates on policies and procedures. This isn't required. It is not required. However, in order for a program to be eligible for an expedited review, you are going to have, programs will be required to have some sort of way of doing this. So that means, so basically we want each policy or procedure to, we want to know when it was last revised or when it was last reviewed. And that will help us then when we're doing the, review for standards that need to be included in the expedited review. One of the criteria there is standards that have been changed since the last peer review. So it'll help us then know exactly which standards, which policies have been changed, and then that applies to what standards. So again, if you're a program that thinks that you ever might want to do the expedited renewal, if it's available to you in the future, this is something you've got to get in place. And then to just remind you that the threshold for the expedited renewal is it's available on alternating cycles, and you would have to earn 90% or higher on the previous peer review to be eligible for the expedited. So if you did a full peer review last time, your peer review report indicated adherence at 90% or greater of the standards, then you would be eligible for the expedited peer review if you had this in place as well. There's two different ways you can do it. You can do it, you know, where you have the procedure name or the policy name, you know, you talk about who is applicable. You don't, those pieces aren't important, but really this dates of revision, and then perhaps an effective date. That's really helpful for the peer reviewers to know when was it put in place. But this dates of revision is the big one. Whether you put that at the beginning of every policy or whether you have some other, this bottom example is kind of the name of the policy, when it was effective, when it was revised, those kinds of things. And that could be kept completely separate from the policy, but as long as those things go together. I've seen, there's a program that I know that does this, the bottom example, and they also keep track of dates that it's been reviewed as well. So that helps them know when they last, not only when they last revised it, but also when they last looked at it, which is helpful for the peer reviewers as well, to kind of know, hey, did they change this policy during TA? Is this something that's new and different? Are we looking at recent practice change, those kinds of things? So if you have any questions about this, or if your program is eligible for an expedited renewal, come talk to me. I will absolutely be able to get you that. So let's dig in. Standard 4. Hold on, I'm going to get a drink of water. So as we talk about standard 4, there's some things that I want to call to your attention at the very beginning. There is a document. It is available on our website. You can ask for it from Leanne or I. We can get it to you as well. And it is this Iowa Family Support Credential definitions. And what it does is it's intended to be used in conjunction with the standards. And it kind of provides additional clarification on different verbiages that you might find in the standards that are kind of unclear. So for example, throughout the standards, there you'll see the word supervisor. The Iowa Family Support Credentials approach, or what we mean by supervisor, is that the program decides who the supervisor is. For example, maybe one supervisor has hiring and firing responsibilities, and another one supervises day-to-day activities for the program. It can be whatever your program decides. On some of the ones that we're going to look at today in standard 4, we talk about 402 says regularly means defined by the program. Be specific on how the program defines regularly. So if you just say in your policy, we regularly do that, the question really is, and we'll talk about this as we dig into it, but the question really is how will your staff know what regular means? And then how will the peer reviewers know what regular means? And then the big question is, how would a brand new staff member, supervisor, family support professional know when the next one is due? You know, is it if the policy, if the what you're really doing is weekly, if it's really bi-weekly, monthly, whatever it is, then that's what needs to be on the policy. If you have just the word regular and there's no definition on that, then it's not going to be meeting the standard. We'll talk more about that as we get into these. So standard 4.01, a family-centered service plan is developed with an appropriate, just a second here. I had to admit somebody. Is developed with an appropriate time frame with the full participation of family members as appropriate, and expedited service planning is available when crisis or urgent needs are identified. So we talked down here in the interpretation about it. The service planning needs to be conducted so that the family members retain as much personal responsibility and self-determination as possible and desired. And then individuals with limited ability in making independent choices can receive help with those. And really the point here is on that interpretation is that these are family driven. These goals are family driven. Some programs will have a service plan that they work on with the families, and they have goals that are family driven. And then they'll have another service plan, they call it sometimes something different, but that is really like, what are the goals that the program has for the work they're doing with the family? This is not that. That is something completely different and not even required by the Iowa Family Support Credential. So just make sure that when you're thinking about standard 401 and all of standard 4 really, you're thinking about the goal planning or service planning that is done in conjunction with the family, and the family is driving that. They're the ones that are making the decisions about what that looks like. So we break it down. We've got some words in here that we want to make sure we really define for you. A family-centered service plan, and again, this has the procedure boost thing down here. So this means these are kind of the things that you're going to want to add or consider adding to your policy or procedure to really boost it and to get it there, so that it really kind of covers everything, and that you have it documented and written down exactly what you're doing, so that the peer reviewers, so new staff, anybody understands how the process works. So appropriate time frame, that's going to really describe that when, and then what you would want to define in that is what the service plan is, when the service plan is completed. Typically that would go in procedure. It could go in policy. I don't like to get caught up in the words between policy and procedure necessarily, but they do mean two separate things. But if you want to call it a policy and really include procedure in there, 100% up to you. We don't have to get like all bogged down in the verbiage of what it's called, because I think a lot of people use them interchangeably, and that's okay too. So where is the appropriate time frame documented? The way that we would be checking for that, or the peer reviewers check for that, is that date on the goal plan form. I'm going to compare that. So if it's that initial family service plan, if your procedure says we do it within 30 days, then the peer reviewers would take the date on the goal plan form, compare that to the date the family was enrolled, to determine if that individual family really did have it developed within that appropriate time frame. And the peer reviewers are doing that anyhow, that piece of things. And it's just that, like, getting it written down, getting that 30 days or whatever that time frame is. They're definitely they already have to be doing that. But the way that they're getting at that 30 days, if it's not written in policy, is they're asking the program, they're asking the family support professionals in the panel interviews, they're asking the supervisors, hey, what is the time frame here? And so if you can eliminate that piece and have it already documented, it makes it that much easier for everybody else. Full participation of family members, that gets at the who. We would want to define that, define who was included from the family in procedure. And then that would also tell staff how they know who they should include. A lot of times we see things like the family gets to, the family's going to pick, or the family decides, which is okay. But like, I think it's kind of that next step of purposefulness, like, okay, who do you want to include in this process? Sometimes it might mean making sure that that the family support professional is attending a visit at a time when everybody who wants to be part of that process can be part of that process, or everybody who the family wants to be part of that process. Um, Seen way too often, and this is just as my own work in the field, where we've got maybe mom setting a goal for what dad's going to do, but dad's not there, he's not participating, he may not even be aware that the goal is being set for him. And so it's kind of like, well, what buy-in does dad have? How do we know, you know, how do we know that they're going to be able to, they're really, first, they want to do it, and two, that they're going to be available to continue the follow-up that needs to happen on that goal. And so being really purposeful in including as many family members as the family wants to include is important. And then where we would want to see that documented is, again, on that goal plan form, or sometimes programs will use forms leading up to that goal plan form. And that's okay too, as long as, you know, whatever that all looks like together captures that information. And then that expedited service planning being available is that last piece. A lot of times we'll have programs say expedited service planning is available, but that's it. We don't get anything else about what that looks like. And so really that needs to be defined out. How is it determined that that's needed? And then what does that actually look like? You would want to define in there the who, what, when, where. If you use a different form, I've seen programs use like a shortened form, kind of like maybe don't go through the whole process of setting the goal. They maybe just kind of have a place to document, like, you know, maybe they're on their second visit with the family and the family support professional shows up. Family is in crisis, needs something, has a goal that they want to work on right away, that there's kind of a shortened process for that. And then they would describe why that's happening. And that could work. That would be exactly what we're looking for there. But really, you can't, the policy can't just like say, oh, it's available, but not describe what it looks like. And if what it looks like is the same as the regular goal planning process, that's okay. But maybe just explain how that works then. Like, if it wouldn't be a visit where you would be talking about goals, you all of a sudden move that to the top of the list of things you're going to talk about, something like that. You know, you have complete autonomy in how you set that up. Just needs to be done and documented. Okay, so and then the other thing that I think, you know, is going to be challenging as we navigate this world into virtual peer reviews, which will probably be going forward for very, you know, into the extended future. That's kind of the plan going forward indefinitely at this point. Is there's two ways that you present evidence to the peer reviewers. You send them, you have your box, which is the typical box that you would send the peer reviewers. You know, that it would contain all of your policies, all of your practice items that don't contain protected health information. So like flyers and meeting minutes and agendas and you know, blank forms and all of that fun stuff. Your maybe community plans, different, you know, for different groups that you participate in, like community groups, those kinds of things. That can go in your box. That doesn't change at all. But the PHI portal is where the stuff that the peer reviewers would typically see when they come on site. It's intended for those items that contain protected health information. So all of your participant files, those kinds of things. So what we wanted to do is kind of break this down and show people what goes in the box that you send peer reviewers ahead of time and what goes in the PHI portal, which is confusing because if you use if stance, it's called Dropbox. But in the PHI portal, for the peer reviewers to review just prior to the peer review. So obviously for this one, a lot of it is that policy that pertains to all the things we talked about before. And then those blank service plan or goal sheets, which include all of the things that we talked about before. And again, you know, going back to the last slide, the procedure, the descriptive words and the procedure definition, that stuff that is the added to piece, the where is it documented, that doesn't change. That the peer reviewers are still going to be looking for it that way. Have always been looking for it that way. It was just capturing those little pieces in policy and procedure that tells the peer reviewers where to go for it, because otherwise they're going to have to figure it out for themselves. And sometimes it's not a straight line from what you say in policy to the form. What you say in policy is what you're doing, doesn't always translate to what it's called on the form, like what that particular field is called or what that particular like spot that you fill in. And so that procedure will allow the peer reviewers to draw that direct line from here to there. It makes sense. Perfect. This is where it's at. Okay. Does anybody have any questions so far? All right. So standard 4.02 is really complicated. So this is going to take us a bit to get through. Because we've got in the standard, the top part of it, the service plan is based on assessment, is tailored to the family's unique needs and priorities, is measurable. Okay, so those are 3 pieces. And then it has to include agreed upon goals, desired outcomes, and timeframes for achieving them, services and supports to be provided that build on the family's strengths and address the family's risks, and by whom. Those are the 2 most complicated ones. Include a parent or legal guardian signature, provider, and family's regular review of progress towards achievement of the goals, and signed revisions to service goals and plans. And that's a lot. So we'll try to break that down into, I don't know if manageable chunks is the right word, but smaller chunks so that we can provide a lens to think about them a little bit. So let's talk about the first part, the top part. Based on the assessment, tailored to the family's unique needs and priorities, and is measurable. Based on assessment, what we're looking for there is those descriptive words, which, or more specifically, how and what. So based on assessment is another one of those places where a lot of times we see a policy that says the service plan is based on assessment, but we don't get that like super clear definition of how. And so your policy and procedure, then if you were going to add to it or boost it up, would be to include which assessments are used in the procedure. The super obvious one is going to be developmental screening, right? Like that one makes sense. That's something you do with the families, and the family is aware of the results. They know how they can use that information then to say, oh yeah, my daughter's scored low in this area. I definitely want to help work with her and help improve that. That's easy. We can say, yeah, the ASQ then is what assessment was used to help drive this goal. It's more challenging when the things that the family wants to work on are things that aren't really found in an assessment, so to speak. Like maybe they want to work on transportation, or they want to move into a new house or something like that. Those aren't necessarily assessments that are done with the family, although they're going to be captured on perhaps an LSP would be a place. It could be that they're being captured on an intake, the information that you're gathering from the family at intake. So this one is a little bit more challenging to draw that straight line for peer reviewers, and so the family is aware of that as well. But I think that when you score a family, when you're looking at the LSP and you've got your various the ratings, I'm stuck in credential world, your numbers that you score the family on, which ones are low, which ones for that family makes sense for them to work on, and maybe a little bit about the family to know which ones they're willing to work on. And so you can use those as tools in your conversation when you're talking to families about goal setting. And so, like I said, it's not a straight line. But if you know some of those areas going into a goal setting, goal conversation with a family, you can use what you already know from the LSP to know what areas the families want to work, might be willing to work, and need to work perhaps to get to that place. So on LSPs, it's not always going to be the straightest line, I guess is my point. But remember, it's family driven. So it's not always the things that the family are going to say are not always going to be maybe what even you think, if the family support professional thinks is something the family wants to work on. Family needs and priorities. This gets at the how, the who, and the what. Those are what we need to look at, how family needs and priorities are determined. define who is involved in this. And I think that the easy answer to that one is to ask the family. Um, a lot of times we see this part be filled in prior to going to the, the home visit with the family, where you um, talk about the goals that they want to set. And so, that doesn't really tell me that the family needs and priorities, that's coming from them. And then also that where that's going to be captured. Is it on the goal plan form? Is there somewhere else? And family and needs and priorities are changing always. So, capturing that information at the very beginning when they enter service and saying that's applicable all through service is probably not the best approach to take on that. I think that should be something that is periodically updated. And I think a good time to do that is during, goal planning, goal setting with the family. Measurable. We'll talk a little bit about SMART later, but just kind of on the very top layer of that is how and who. Define how the service plan is measured, who measures it. And this part is the service plan is measurable. So we don't need to talk about those individual pieces necessarily so much at that higher level, but we will. But we need to make sure that there's a way to measure it. And this could be done on those individual goals, but we want to make sure that each individual goal has a tool by which it can be measurable. Sometimes we'll see where when the family fills it out, it's kind of, we don't really know how to say when that's done. Well, let's define how we say when that's done. Let's how will we know when? I mean, that's a really good question to ask. Is like, the family sets a goal that maybe is kind of ambiguous in that way. You can definitely then say, how will we know when that's done? How will we know to move on to the next goal? And then take their lead on that. I think that the goal conversation is really just being able to guide a conversation about about anything. But family support work isn't just coming to a home and let me teach you about how to be your child's first best teacher or whatever. It is learning how to navigate a conversation, how to take something that the family's saying and provide the family some education and some I'm losing the word right now, sorry. Some ability to advocate for themselves, and some down the road the ability to be independent and to be able to do this kind of stuff without their family support worker coming to their home every week. The next piece is that we want to really kind of hit on before we cover it is the difference between goals and outcomes, because the standard does reference both. And it's important to understand they're not necessarily interchangeable, I guess. That's probably the way I would say that. A lot of times I see where on a goal planning form, it'll say like goals / outcome. And I don't know that those are the same things. And I don't think for the purposes of the standard, it's intended to be the same thing either. So a goal is more of a broad statement. What does the family want to do? This is more that piece that's going to be probably tied to that assessment piece like we talked about earlier. The outcome is a more specific statement that's tied to the goals. Who does it? What does it look like? Those are the how are we going to measure it piece. So I've got a couple of examples down here. So the broader goal will be that the child has their health and developmental needs met. The specific outcomes that we're going to look at, or that the family may choose to look at, will that they want to take their child to the pediatrician and get him or her current on their vaccinations, or that their child will learn to walk. Those things are more measurable. We can say, yeah, they did that thing, or they didn't do those things. But the goal, I think that's maybe a piece that is outcomes will take less time to achieve. A goal is a bigger, broader kind of thing. And I don't know that we're always, that you're always going to say every 6 months we can check off a goal. And as we know, sometimes there's multiple steps to a goal. A really good example, I had a family who wanted to get her driver's license. And as we kind of dug into it, we found that there was going to be a lot of steps, and each step outcome was going to have steps underneath it that were necessary. She was going to need to get a social security card. Well, in order to get a social security card, she was going to need to prove that she was who she says she was. Well, she didn't even have the documentation that she needed to prove that she was who she said she was. She'd lived her youth as she had two different last names, one in school and one that was her legal last name. And it was just, so she'll do a lot of steps. So my point being is the goal was to get her driver's license or to drive or whatever, but there was going to be lots of outcomes that led up to that. And I think that really those specific steps or outcomes are what we can use, or what we can guide the family to help them feel like their overall goal is more manageable, and ultimately celebrate those more frequent successes. I think that's a really good way to also use writing SMART goals as a process to role model for families how setting goals can really work in any scenario. Sometimes that big picture goal seems huge, but then when we learn how to break it down into smaller, more manageable bite-sized pieces, then it feels like you're making progress. And when you feel like you're making progress, you're going to be more willing to continue and not give up. And, or when you hit that roadblock, not be like, yeah, I can't do this. I'm not going to, So those are the differences as we kind of move into this next standard, or this next piece of the standard. So as we continue to break down 4.02, it's important to know that all of the bullet points are required. Sometimes there's some interpretations there that aren't really there. All of the standards or all the bullets are required. Programs have to define that regular for 4.01 bullet point D. Talked about that before. We're going to talk about it. This is, kind of where we talk about it there is really, if you're, I'll say it, I can't say it much more blunt than this. If your policy says regular in it and there's no additional clarification, you need to add some additional clarification there, because that is a piece that the peer reviewers are probably already asking your family support professionals, supervisors in those panel interviews, like, yeah, what does regular mean? But it's also going to be an out of adherence for that standard going forward. It also is an opportunity to create some confusion for the staff when they're going through, or supervisors when they're going through and doing their own case, like file audits or case audits or whatever you want to call them, where you're checking, like, did this get done in time? Did this get done in time? Not having clear definition on that. Regular is subjective. What regular means to me might be very different than what it means to the peer reviewer or to staff, so we want to make sure we have that really nailed down. Timeframes for achieving goals and outcomes. There we're talking about when, where, who. Defining when the timeline is set. Define when the timeline is written. Define who sets and records the timeline. Is the family actually writing on the piece of paper the goals and breaking them down, or are they saying them verbally and somebody else is capturing that? Like, what does that look like? What should that look like? What is your program's expectation for what that looks like? And capture that all in procedure. Is there a space for the T part of your goal on the goal planning form, and who fills that out? Again, that's coming back to that time frame, that making it measurable. How do we know when it's done? All of those things. So services and supports that builds on family strengths and addresses risks addresses families' risks. Who, where, and when on that one as well. Define when and where both services and supports build on the strengths and address risks. Define the family's role in this. Define where this is recorded. Again, that's very similar to that piece previously when we talked about the family needs and priorities. Strengths and family risks are something that the family should have a say in. This is a family-driven plan. They should be the ones kind of coming up with those things. I know the strengths part is hard. How many times have we sat down with a family and said, all right, so tell me about your strengths? One, this can come at a goal or an outcome level. So the conversation can actually be, so your plan is, your goal is you want to get your child current on their vaccinations. What are some strengths that you have, that it's going to help you get to there, and kind of help them hone in on specific strengths to that, and then if they aren't able to come up with any, you can ask them, is this a strength? Is it a strength that you have a relationship with a friend who's able to take you to the pediatrician who can help you with transportation? Is it a strength that, whatever it is? I think that It's absolutely appropriate to help families come up with strengths, but I think sometimes we'd be surprised what they come up with all on their own, or not. Sometimes they just look at you like they've never been asked to identify a strength before in their life, and that's a really awesome thing that you get to be a part of that and help them learn to come up with their strengths. That's fantastic. And then the documentation piece, where is it documented? It should be somewhere on your goal planning form. Again, this needs to be updated regularly. It's not like we just list their strengths at the beginning when they enter service and that's it. That's the only time we talk about it. And then who fills that part in? Is it the families? Is it the staff? Who does that? I've seen both. Both are okay. I think, there's not one that's one more okay than the other, but just making sure that you know what the expectation is. Family and providers regular review of progress. So who, when, and where, or how was it documented? So there's kind of a lot of pieces on this one. Define regular. How often does that occur? When would a staff or reviewer know when to expect the next review of progress? Who participates in the review of the progress? The clue there is it really should be the family and the provider together. Where is it documented? And how is the family's role in the review of progress captured? A lot of times we'll see things like, we'll see the staff's kind of interpretation of what the family's progress is, but we don't kind of see that piece of like, is it being talked about with the family? Where, it should be really a more of a formalized conversation. I don't know that any part of home visits are formal, so to speak, but the family should, it's not just like a check-in at the beginning of every visit, like, hey, how are your goals coming? I think that it can be a little bit more purposeful than that. Is it captured on the same form that you set your goals on, or a different form? Is it captured in the case notes? Sometimes we have, programs that will say, okay, well, that's documented in the case notes. So there'll be a part of the case notes that say, an update on goals. But that's really hard, because then how do we know like the family's role in that? How do we know? We can describe it, but I think that there's, capturing in the case notes is, how do I say it? There's the times that we see when that happens, there's a lot of opportunity for things to get missed, for staff to forget to capture it, for it not to be as descriptive as it maybe needs to be. Sometimes they'll just say goals talked about, check. Like there's no, hey, we talked about this goal and this is where the family's at. And I don't know that saying goals checked is really value added in any way. And it's not purposeful. And really all this, the Iowa Family Support Credential is about is creating purpose. And that purpose is what builds better programs. And then do families sign off on that regular review? It's not required. We've seen it on forms once in a while, and that's great. That's okay too. I think it's a really easy way to say, yeah, that's done. Like family definitely did that. They were definitely a part of things. And then signed revisions. It's going to talk about when, who, where, define how a staff knows if a revision is necessary. For example, address the difference between a revision and a new goal. How will staff know that they're just revising the goal? And how will staff know when they need to actually write a new goal with the family? So some examples of that one is sometimes a revision might be appropriate when, say, a family is nearing the end of like when they wanted to have that goal or outcome finished by, and they need to extend it for a little bit longer. Whereas, maybe a new goal is they achieved it early. They gave themselves 6 months on it. They got it done in 2 months. They need to set a new goal. You really want to be careful on that one, because a lot of times I've seen where you'll say, okay, well, we talk about the policy will say, or kind of maybe not even policy, but the way that it's done is they'll say, we talk about goals every January and every July. Well, what happens if the family gets the goal done in March? Are you just going to sit until July before you start talking about a new goal? Like, no, it's appropriate to start the new goal then. Define who signs a revision. And the clue on that one really is that the revision needs to be signed by both the family and the staff, and then define where the signatures go. And this kind of gets into the one I've got under where it's documented is avoid having families and staff sign the margins on this. Give them a place to sign on the form. If your form doesn't have a place to sign, then find a way to add that on there. Too often do I see, and this one comes up in peer review quite a bit, where there's something written in the margin. It turns out that it's a signature, but the peer reviewers don't know what it is. And so they don't know what's written over there. They don't know why it's written over there. And really it's a signed revision, which knowing, that kind of stuff might have been helpful in understanding that whole, like, when the next goal should have been done, to determine if if there was a gap between when the goal expired and a new goal was created, or if a goal got extended. Like, there's just so much confusion and ambiguity that gets caught there if you're just signing something in the margin. Okay, so this again breaks it down, what goes in your box, what goes in the PHI portal. I feel like it's pretty clear. I'm not going to dig in this one because we literally just talked about all this stuff, but it's here for you in case you want to reference it. We also have this document available, like just like this, for all of the standards. If you'd like that, talk to me, talk to Leanne, and we can definitely get that for you. Standard 4.03. So this one is a bit of a twist on things. This is the supervision. I don't love that word in this one, but really that's what it means, of the goal planning process. So this is that check-in that happens between a supervisor or perhaps even an experienced provider that kind of checks in with themselves to make sure these things are going well, and about the pieces of the goal plan. So 4.03 is directly in conjunction with 2701, which is the case notes, the components of the case notes, the piece where it talks about supervision. It's like, I can't remember the bullet point. I might have had it listed in here, but in 2701, it talks about, that's like what is in the case record. And when they say supervision, it's only this part. It's not the overall other parts of supervision that happen for the family. It's not case audits. It's not file audits. It's not anything else. It is this. So if this standard is out of adherence, 2701 will be out of adherence because it didn't, not only was it not done in 4.03, but then it wasn't documented in 2701. So those things kind of tie right together. Let's see here. So provider and supervisor or peer team, sometimes we have those co-peer supervisors, like that'll be like a two staff from different programs that have like an MOU agreement or those kind of things. Review the case quarterly to assess service plan implementation, family's progress towards achieving goals and desired outcomes, and continuing appropriateness of the family's goals. Here's down here in the interpretation is where there's that piece about experienced providers. They may conduct reviews of their own cases. In such cases, the provider's supervisor reviews a sample of the provider's evaluation as per the requirements of the standard. Timeframes should be adjusted for service plan. Timeframes for service plan review should be adjusted depending on issues and needs of the person receiving services, the frequency and intensity of services provided. Meaning that quarterly is the minimum. If you've got a family that's high needs, if you've got a staff that's new, if you've got a staff that's experiencing, challenging workload, all of those things that are talked about, I think it's standard 1405. If those things are happening, then you might want to consider doing it more than quarterly, but at a minimum quarterly. And if your policy doesn't say quarterly, make sure it says quarterly, because that's an easy fix. Okay, so a couple of things to know at the beginning here. How the program determines if a staff is an experienced provider, that they're going to be doing their own reviewing of service plans, should be described in policy. If your program is a program that you think that's an issue, that's something that's happening now, or that you think that you might want to do that down the line, make sure it's enshrined in policy. And then also the policy should include how the supervisor reviews a portion of those evaluations. I'll tell you, one of the things that happens quite a bit is we'll see, the policy will be the standard. And then the peer reviewers will start to look at it and find out that really what's going on is we've got an experienced provider who's looking at a lot of their own cases and doing their own reviews. And then we've got the supervisor reviewing a piece of those. But because the policy didn't say any of that, like, it's really unclear to the peer reviewers. And there's really no like check-in on like how did the peer reviewers know that that staff member is like experienced and that they meet the qualifications or the requirements, that the program is going to have in order to do those kinds of things. So make sure you've got that described in policy or procedure. Make sure that that piece of how the supervisor reviews those is also being described in policy and procedure, and make sure there's a way that that's getting documented. I also have seen that a lot where the supervisor's reviewing a portion, but that's not getting covered, that's not getting documented anywhere. And then again, each bullet needs to be documented that it was discussed. Just having a checkbox that says service plans reviewed isn't going to work. So we're going to talk a little bit here. Really, it's for each one of these pieces. Define who is involved in the review, define how often it is reviewed, and define where it is documented. Best practices are going to include a narrative on the discussion, rather than just like, yep, done, or this is the date it was done. Sometimes we'll see like the date. So it was done on August 17th. And then it'll say service plan implementation. And then there's a place for somebody to check. Family's progress, place for that to check. Continuing appropriateness, place to check. In which, yeah, okay, that is very minimal, but like, if we're going to do something, we might as well do it with purpose, right? So, but we can get into the next couple of slides. But I mean, having that narrative, documenting that narrative. Yeah, this is where the family is at on it. This is, the guidance that maybe the supervisor provided to the family support professional about some additional ways that they could implement that service plan, some additional things they could do to help that family meet that goal, whether it's provide additional materials, different referral, all of those different things. I think that a narrative, again, if you're going to do something, do it with purpose, right? Make sure that don't just do something for the sake of checking it off. So then to kind of dig into this, because I know these topics are kind of vague: service plan implementation, family's progress, continuing appropriateness, like what do those mean? So we've got some slides here that'll help you kind of determine what that means. Service plan implementation: what tasks or responsibilities does the family support professional or organization have in helping the family complete their goal? What referrals, if necessary, has the family support professional made? What specific progress has been made on the family's goal? That was like pretty basic. That's probably the piece that most programs, get pretty well. I like those questions about like, what has been done? What needs to be done going forward? And then some examples here. They conducted the 6-month ASQ, target child scored this way. The family support professional brought a parent handout on talking about XYZ topic. It's again, that purposeful piece. It's talking about the specific things that the staff is doing to make sure that that service plan is successful and that the family is successful in that. And it's, that's that question of what's going good, what's going well, where are some opportunities, where are some things that, we could help boost that family or boost that service plan even better. What is the family's progress towards achieving goals and desired outcomes? This is the piece of what is steps has the family taken towards meeting their goals. Be sure you include those small steps in that if you're going to have the conversation, and then again that narrative and that documentation of that. Not only celebrating those successes with the family is a good thing, but celebrating them like as a worker and as a supervisor of a staff member, like that's a really important piece as well, because yes, the family did the work. They're the ones who really get the benefit of that outcome. But like, hey, good job, like staff member, you this family was successful because of you, and celebrating those. So the more times we get to celebrate success, better it is, right? Has the family made any phone calls to access a resource? Has the family started implementing something that they've learned? Maybe it was they wanted to, about potty training, toilet training, and maybe the family started the first part of that, so checking, documenting that or having that discussed and covered. So there's some examples down here. And continuing appropriateness. Has the family met a goal? Does the family want to continue working on a goal? What would they like to go at? Sometimes you get that step, that part in the process where it doesn't really seem like the family has been moving forward very much lately on that goal. So then, maybe this is the time to say, do you think the family's invested in this goal? Like, and then you kind of have that path, like what can we do to help the family reinvest? Or what can we do to help the family, decide maybe that this isn't the right time for them on that goal. And then also those keeping a handle on those timeframes for the goals. Does that timeframe need to be extended? Got some examples down here. You know, these are all long. Family no longer wants to learn about how to become a vet tech. Families decided to explore a career in mortuary science, like, you know, whatever that looks like. And then maybe the you know, the guidance that's being provided to family support professionals, like, okay, sounds like that family doesn't want to go that with that goal anymore. Like maybe next time bring out, you know, the paperwork and start talking about a new goal. And really, you should always have that paperwork, you know, available in case you show up on some random day and the family's like ready to do a new goal. But anyway, neither here nor there. Here's some examples of that kind of narrative piece, or where that 4.03 is captured. So it provides a place for all of these things. Family support professional signature, supervisor signature, and the date. The date's important because it's going to be able to help. It's going to tell the peer reviewers that it's done, that each family was reviewed quarterly. So it's not like you do some quarterly, it's every family, every quarter. Here's another example of one. Here is kind of at the top here where it says they do have those check where they would check off like service plan implementation, but then having the documentation down below, you know, is helpful. That's what we would hope for the program. Again, talking about what goes where. I'm not going to read through all of that. And we are at the end. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, anything? You can go ahead and you can unmute yourself. You can add it in the chat. You can email me later if you want to, or email Leanne if you worked with her or are working with her. Okie doke. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Here is our contact information. My phone number has changed. It's not really changed, but it's kind of changed. This is a better way to get a hold of me. It's probably the better way to say that. My cell phone number, if you have that, is still valid and all of those things. I just don't always answer my cell phone when I'm not working. So anyway, we will have our next webinar. It is the third Thursday of the month. No, it must be the fourth Thursday of the month. I could be wrong. I don't know. It's something. Anyway, that information will be sent out via email. We'll also post it on our Facebook page so that if you don't get it there, you can get it there. I appreciate everybody joining me. Have a great rest of the day, and I will talk to you all soon, I'm sure. Bye.